Hi, everyone, and welcome to this morning's session. This is the first session of the wrap-up event for the Atlantic KETMED project. Atlantic KETMED is a European project that was funded under the Atlantic Area InterRegional Programme, or InterReg programme. And I'm very excited this morning to introduce one of our keynote speakers. Ruslan Rakhmatullin is a person who I met in 2014 in NUI Galway. And at that time, we were thinking about trying to develop programs for graduate education and hopefully directing them towards regional innovation. And Ruslan came and shared an insight into smart specialization. And smart specialization is this policy within Europe that has led to many of the research programs since around 2012 onwards. So I'm delighted to invite Ruslan back to NUI Galway in a virtual sense to share with us just the development of the smart specialization strategies. So over to you, Ruslan.
Thank you, Jared. Thank you for this introduction. So the presentation I've put together for you is not only aims to give a bit of a background into the principle of smart specialization, but also, as Jared pointed out, about some of the developments in the context of research innovation strategies in the EU context. So maybe a little bit about myself. I've worked for the S3 platform, or the Smart Specialization platform, which is based at the European Commission's Joint Research Center in Seville, Spain, for about 10 years. And over this time, I've worked directly with regional and national governments across the European Union and outside the European Union to help them both to understand the concept of smart specialization, but also to help with various issues that they would face when implementing it on the ground. Just one second. So basically, back in 2011, 2012, the European Commission put in place this smart specialization platform. It's based in one of the EU regions in the very south of Spain, as I said, Andalusia, but it's also part of the European Commission. And it was charged with helping European regions primarily and member states to understand what it is the European Commission proposed as the concept of smart specialization. So the platform has developed a large number of tools ranging from various kind of guidance materials, publications. The majority of staff at the S3 platform, as well as GRC site in Seville, actually have academic background. They all come from various schools across the world. So we've developed a large number of publications, also a number of interactive tools that allow regions or member states to compare their performance in terms of research and innovation with other peers or similarly sized regions, for example, in other parts of the European Union. And here you probably will notice at the very bottom, there's a new kind of focus that the Smart Specialization platform decided to take about 4 or 5 years ago, and that's its focus on value chains. I'll come back to this a little later. So just to refresh, maybe for those of you not as familiar with the principle of smart specialization, it's a methodology developed by the European Commission together with academic experts, and it's based on a number of key principles. So it's evidence-based. It also requires policymakers to develop a limited number of priorities in order to focus or concentrate investment. It's based on the so-called stakeholder engagement process. And it's about employing a broader definition of innovation. So it's not purely technological innovation, but also in certain regions, we encouraged policymakers to consider other types of innovation, like public sector innovation and so on. And maybe finally, the last principle is about monitoring and evaluation and making sure that policies such as smart specialization strategies are reviewed regularly. The team at the S3 platform in Seville has developed two specific guides. The first one is Guide to Research and Innovation Strategies, and it discusses the very principles behind smart specialization, while the second guide or handbook deals with various implementation issues. Both are available from the website. So effectively, smart specialization is as a way to help develop regional or national, in some cases, research and innovation strategies, or also we refer to these as integrated place-based economic transformation agenda for research and innovation. So these, as I said, are evidence-based, involve the quadruple helix partners. So it's a kind of an open process, covers various forms of innovation, but also looks at the ecosystem approach altogether. Importantly, we talk about finding a niche for each country or region in which they could compete globally, as well as trying to focus at least a bulk of resources or the national or regionally available funding, but also EU funding that regions would receive on a limited number of priorities in order to achieve critical mass in these areas. And one other area that has been introduced with the smart specialization was a requirement to build relationships and links with other European Union regions and countries. I'll come back to this a little bit later. So legally speaking, during the last funding period from 2014 to 2020, EU member states, so the smart specialization, often abbreviated as RIS3. So RIS3 stands for Research and Innovation, basically strategies for smart specialization. RIS3 was introduced as ex-ante conditionality, meaning that EU member states and regions had to have smart specialization in place before they would be able to draw funds from the European Union. And there were certain elements that were used when evaluating this ex-ante conditionality. As we now entered into a new funding period, so it's 2021-2027 period, the name of that condition has changed slightly. It's now known as enabling condition. And under this enabling condition, we talk about good governance of national and regional smart specialization strategies. And you see here's a list of 7 fulfillment criteria for this particular enabling condition. Some of the more interesting ones, perhaps for you, would be the first one. So each strategy has to be based on good evidence, or up-to-date analysis of challenges for innovation, diffusion, and digitalization in each region or territory. Could be at the level of a member state. There has to be a dedicated person or public body in charge of that smart specialization strategy, both in terms of its development, but also managing various projects under the strategy. And maybe one of the new criteria is the last one. So there has to be evidence of dedicated measures for enhancing cooperation with partners outside each member state. So each European member state or region has to show what are the measures that are being put in place in order to develop these interregional or transnational connections. Speaking of the type of priorities that have been identified and defined by member states and regions, clearly they vary a lot. But when we talk about priorities, they're not at the sectoral level. So we do, during the evidence, when we collect data, we do mapping at the sectoral level, but then do a breakdown at the level of activities. And this is the level at which we generally recommend defining priorities for a good smart specialization strategy. So here are 3 examples of such priorities. Another example of a national level smart specialization strategy is what I have on my slide. So this is a page for the Irish national level smart specialization strategies. So in some cases, strategies were developed at the national level. In other cases, these were developed at the regional level. Each member state was free to decide, even though the European Union recommended having a regional dimension to every national strategy where possible. So in case of Ireland, had a slightly different exercise that was the background for the Smart Specialization Strategy, and it was known as the National Research Prioritization Exercise, and it gave kind of or helped to define a list of these priority areas that I have on the right-hand side. These strategies are similarly have to be reviewed. So, for example, in Ireland, these strategies, so the National Smart Specialization Strategy was being reviewed during the summer. Here's the link and the National Smart Specialization Strategy consultation paper, which could be of interest to some of you. Speaking of the developments, so during the first funding period, when smart specialization was introduced, so this is 2014-2020, what has been achieved broadly is a very large number of smart specialization strategies. So over 100 kind of accepted and defined smart specialization strategies have been put in place, with over 40 billion euros allocated under these strategies. So we have witnessed a certain paradigm shift in terms of how European member states and regions plan their research and innovation investments. And we certainly see that they are focusing now specifically on a very limited number of priorities. There's a higher level of engagement when it comes to involving stakeholders. And also we see a much greater the interregional cooperation component. So here's a slide also of some of the priorities. So a study carried out for DG Regio, so one of the DGs of the European Commission that deals with regional policy. As you see, some of the most popular areas for smart specialization priorities. So clearly each smart specialization priority can be linked to more than one area, but here the study only looked basically at the main area of each priority. And as you see, 21% of priorities have been linked to agri-food and bioeconomy. I think that we have ICT and Industry 4.0, so speaking of automation and so on, at 15%, and then health and life sciences at 15%. But you will see that there are an increasingly large number of other areas, for example, energy and energy storage, blue growth, aerospace and defense, and clean tech, that are all appearing in this particular slide. So what I mentioned as one of the novelties that came with the smart specialization is the so-called outward-looking dimension. And the outward-looking dimension is where the European Commission, the European Union, suggests that each good smart specialization strategy should not put in place priorities in which European member states and regions would directly compete with their neighbors, but would find a way to actually build on these complementarities. And one example is, the last one is it's about joining global value chains, GVCs, in order to be able to compete globally. So I'll go into that a little bit later. To help regions to understand about the options available for transnational and interregional cooperation and global value chains, we put together the implementation handbook, and one chapter in it specifically deals with transnational cooperation and value chains and explains and gives examples of how that could be done. What we've noticed also over the first maybe 7 years since the introduction of smart specialization is that there was a lot more interest in cross-border cooperation within the context of smart specialization now. And also there was a lot more talk about various platforms and the need to put such platforms into place. So in 2014, there was this European Union communication for a European industrial renaissance that talked and suggested that European Union should help put together thematic smart specialization platforms that would help regions and regional actors such as firms and clusters to work together in specific technological or sectoral areas. So starting in 2016, this is what the European Commission did under the umbrella of the Smart Specialization Platform, hosted by the Joint Research Center in Seville. The European Commission services have put together 3 additional sub-platforms. We used to refer to them as platforms. So these are on agri-food, energy, and industrial modernization. And these were put in place specifically to help European regions and member states to develop an investment pipeline of bankable projects and connecting various innovation ecosystems that are in place in different regions. And finally, there were also, the idea was to help them use infrastructure in a shared way, such as testing facilities, pilot plants, so they don't have to be put in place in every region participating in these platforms. So the methodology that we developed, basically, it took the principle of global value chains. The idea was that we would look at the publicly funded R&D in various regions and then help to identify areas of shared interest between regions, go through co-funded joint goals open to participants from all involved regions, and then with a particular focus on demonstration projects. So we talk about technology readiness levels 6 and 7. We would have some examples of joint pilots, so co-managed by a number of regions, that would lead effectively to new funding and new markets, and effectively, hopefully leading to new products and services and new value chains. This methodology was in fact inspired by the so-called Vanguard Initiative. It's a group of fairly advanced European regions, and they've come up with this 4-step methodology for connecting regional projects. So the initial methodology was about learn, connect, demonstrate, commercialize. And then based on that, as I said, we've developed it into a slightly more complete methodology that looked also at a way of scaling up these projects. And in addition, we operationalized and have the kind of dark blue boxes here are the kind of operational elements that each partnership would go through, like developing a scoping note that identifies the areas for cooperation in order to map competencies and business opportunities, and then lead to design of projects, business plan, and funding mix, and so on. This has been especially the first 2 phases, learn and connect, in order to help policymakers to understand how to work together in something that is very applied, hands-on. We put together another methodological manual that looks specifically on how to develop thematic interregional partnerships for smart specialization, how to carry out the analysis required for the scoping note, and it covers a lot of similar topics, including matchmaking events and so on. So quite an interesting document for those who deal with interregional cooperation. Here's a map with an overview of all thematic S3 partnerships that there are currently operating. So there are about 28 partnerships that involve over 150 regions anyway. And as you see, there are certain parts within Europe that certain regions that are particularly active in these partnerships. So briefly about the agri-food platform, it's one of the 3 platforms that were put in place. So there are 5 partnerships: consumer involvement, high-tech farming, which is about the use of sensors and so on, nutrition ingredients, smart sensors, again for agri-food, and then traceability and big data, which is about using big data within the supply chains. The second platform is about energy, It deals with bioenergy and other types of energy, as well as sustainable buildings. And then finally, the third platform, which actually happens to be the most popular in terms of activities, is the so-called Smart Specialization Platform for Industrial Modernization, sometimes abbreviated as 3P industry. And this is a particularly interesting example of how the European Commission was or is supporting various interregional partnerships. So there are 4 parent DGs. These are directorates within the Commission that support it. These are often policy. They're responsible for policies. Like Regio, for example, DG Regio is responsible for regional policy. GROW is dealing with kind of industrial policy side, and RTD is responsible primarily for Horizon Europe, which is one of the largest pots of funding available. So together with JRC was put there to coordinate and kind of help develop the methodology. They've now developed a large number of partnerships. So here we have, these are the partnerships currently under the Industrial Modernization Platform. I've circled 4 that I think could be of particular interest to some of you. So these are on photonics, new nano-enabled products, advanced materials for batteries, ADMA as an advanced manufacturing energy, and so on. But there are also those that are maybe less kind of connected to various technologies, such as, for example, social economy or sport and vitality, although there is actually a technical dimension to that one as well. These are examples of some of the actual partnerships. So this one is the interregional partnership on photonics. It's led by South Netherlands, so the region of South Netherlands. And then there are 4 working areas. So photonics integrated circuits, sensing, measuring, and imaging, optical fibers for industry, and pilot facility for photonics-based manufacturing. As you see, each of these working groups is then led by 1 or 2 or even 3 regions, and altogether they basically complement each other's activities with I think their goal is basically to put in place kind of an interregional ecosystem of facilities that deal with photonics. So another example I have is on new nano-enabled products. They are similarly trying to develop an industrial ecosystem and nanotechnology, but their focus is on developing pilot production facilities for products based on nanomaterials in partner regions in a way where these facilities, pilot production facilities, complement other regions' facilities in order not to replicate or having to put in place a new facility in each region. Again, there are 3 working groups that focus on a slightly different specific part of the work packages. So overall, 3 platforms, as I said, have been very successfully put in place. A lot of interest in partnerships from across Europe. So what we realized is that there are certain difficulties clearly when it comes to commercializing and scaling up some of these projects. So even if you have a successful group of regions that are interested in investing their own funds or also European Union funds into some of these projects, it's difficult sometimes to overcome other barriers, for example, related to funding certain activities. So in order to understand how to overcome these, the European Union's DG Regio, so DG responsible for regional policy, put in place a kind of a pilot action that selected 8 partnerships, so 8 mature partnerships, interregional partnerships, and it worked directly with them for a year. I think it was 2019, 2020. Work directly with them in order to understand what are the problems and how to solve these. So there were people, experts attached to it, who basically worked the way through in order to not only help these interregional partnerships, but also develop a new instrument. And this is exactly what happened. So you remember I talked about the 5-step approach, methodological approach. So there are learn, connect, demonstrate, commercialize, scale up steps, and different parts of it are currently taken. So there are different facilities like thematic platforms supporting interregional partnerships through learn and connect phases. And then the DigiRegio action pilot projects were helping to bridge, connect, to demonstrate. And what happened is seeing the success or the very active participation of so many regions in these activities, European Union actually introduced a new instrument known as the InterRegional Innovation Investments, so I3. They will take care of the commercialize and scale up part. As a result, a new agency was launched, so agency that merged basically SMEs, Executive Agency, and European Innovation Council into one. It was put in place on the 1st of April this year, and specifically given a mandate to develop further the interregional innovation investment, but specifically in the form of grants now. So the Interregional Innovation Investments Initiative is about providing financial and advisory supports. There are two types of actions: innovation actions for mature partnerships in order to connect demand and supply to accelerate interregional innovation investments in smart specialization priority areas, and simplified innovation actions for the less developed regions. So this is specifically about grants now, so financial support to interregional partnerships that are interested in developing either joint pilot facilities or demonstration sites and so on. There is an event that was supposed to take place on the 19th of October. I'm not sure if it's postponed and if this is the new date, but I would suggest here is a link for those of you interested to save that link and maybe check regularly to be able to attend their workshop. Quickly about the smart specialization developments outside the European Union. There are certain countries that the European Union has particularly strong relationships with. So we're working with Moldova, Ukraine, Georgia, and Tunisia. So specifically with these countries to help them develop smart specialization strategies based on the methodology developed by the European Commission. And they are provided support, in fact, not only in terms of guidance, but also, in fact, there's certain funding that's allocated to these countries to help them develop maybe pilot projects to test smart specialization, the smart specialization approach, for example, in a smaller region in Georgia before expanding it to the national level. Or in case of Ukraine, Ukraine has a lot of regions, so it's a kind of a more complex task there. And then there is the EU enlargement group of countries that are aspiring to become part of the European Union. And there's a dedicated project that actually runs at the Smart Specialization platform as well. So I was, for example, involved in the activities on Albania, Bosnia and Herzegovina, and Kosovo, but also other countries like Turkey are, in fact, involved in these activities. I'm also developing or working to develop smart specialization strategies. So here is a map of countries where either smart specialization in Europe has been already put in place in blue, or countries where they're quite advanced when it comes to smart specialization developments. And then those in green are the countries that what the European Union is currently working with. In addition to that, there is also this beyond the EU approach to smart specialization, and a number of countries approached the smart specialization platform. These are, as you see, in terms of Americas, Canada at the top, Mexico, and a lot of countries in South America have already already working, in fact, with the Smart Specialization platform. In Mexico, they started developing smart specialization strategies back in 2000, I think, 16. They already had the initial strategies. Here's an example of a smart specialization strategy developed by the Hunter region in Australia. It was actually launched in 2016, and they put together a regional strategy that's based on the principles of smart specialization, with 7 priority areas identified by them as a result of that work. Again, my colleagues at the S3 platform were working with them. Some of the more recent developments are also in countries like Peru, but also Thailand. We generally provide, so last August and this actually August, I've delivered a lecture on smart specialization and how, you know, various obstacles maybe that could be faced by countries that put it in place. So the Thai authorities and Thai innovation policymakers attend these training sessions in order to learn about it as well. And maybe before I finish my presentation, there's a new development on connecting smart specialization, so S3, with the principles defined, or the Sustainable Development Goals, or SDGs, as we often refer to them, SDGs defined by the United Nations. Within the context of that work, together with the United Nations, the European Commission's Joint Research Center put together a guidebook for the preparation of science and technology innovation for SDGs roadmaps. And in fact, it deals basically, and it kind of discusses how to combine national development plans or agenda with dedicated STI plans. So in case of many countries across the world, they have kind of a STI strategies or agendas. And now with the introduction of the SDGs, often there is an SDG agenda. So it's somewhat complex to combine these 3 together. And smart specialization, in fact, has been selected as one of the few strategies, but methodologies really, that can help with the development of these STI for SDGs roadmaps. So the developments on smart specialization at this point. So with smart specialization initially introduced in 2011, 2012, 10 years later, we find ourselves in a place where an increasing number of countries across the world are increasingly interested in this approach. And as you see, there are new kind of applications to the principles introduced with smart specialization. Well, I'm going to stop my presentation at this point. Thank you very much for your attention, and I'm happy to take any questions if you have any.
Okay, thank you very much, Ruslan, for a very interesting presentation. Yeah, so much has happened over the last 10 years, I would say. So thanks for all your hard work and hard work with the people in Seville. Maybe just to keep the discussion going and maybe to ask some questions, maybe certainly would be interested just on, you know, if you were to step back and kind of ask yourself, how successful was the smart specialization, do you think, in Europe? You know, was there any kind of, you know, sound bites of people saying, you know, we're really glad that smart specialization kicked in, or that Europe was much more productive in its regions with S3 rather than without S3? Could you maybe share any comments on that?
It's a very good question, Jared. So I would say smart specialization certainly was needed, because a huge amount of funds is being spent on national and regional innovation policies across the European Union. A lot of more developed countries spend their own national resources on topics such as research innovation. But in a large number of new EU member states, European Union has an enormous budget that's being spent on regional policy. So what we noticed a lot is that often when you look back, there are these wonderful projects that were often developed, in many cases with the use of the European money. But very often they try to put in place something that is in direct competition with a similarly publicly funded project in a near, neighboring country, or even sometimes in some cases a region that's next door, purely because policymakers that were in charge of these policies didn't really consider looking and building some sort of a synergy. Yeah. And what we've noticed now is that there is a lot more awareness of the need not only to look at your own innovation ecosystem as a kind of like a fish tank, but also looking at it as only one part of the sea. And that Ireland is a good example of a kind of a globally aware economy, where a lot of developments, for example, the National Research Prioritization Exercise, took some of the global challenges as one of the criteria from the very beginning. Many other countries didn't really do that. And then on the other hand, what we've noticed as well, maybe the second part to smart specialization, it's not just about evidence, it's also about having the regional dimension. The regional disparity exists even in small countries, even in countries like Ireland. If you go to various parts of Ireland, the Irish government is aware of these challenges. There are pockets of the country that are not as perhaps developed as they could be. So if you look at the new policy paper on smart specialization in Ireland, you will see they have put in place 3 specific sections on 3 regions in Ireland. So now the Irish government is looking at a way to use the principle of smart specialization in order to actually address these regional disparities. And I think it's a huge development for countries, even Ireland, well, including Ireland.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I suppose we've seen that in the UK as well, where they identified regions and they separated in these regions out and put in particular measures to develop those regions, in the last 10, 15 years as well. So it's interesting that on a smart specialization in Ireland is going down to a micro level to cover sub-regions of the national regions. So it's interesting. I think one of the advantages of smart specialization for me as a researcher is that I could almost look into the neighboring regions or any regions in Europe to identify what their strengths were when I was looking for partners to put that together. Is that transparency still there? Is it going to continue? That communication of the smart specialization strategies of the different regions?
Yes, it's still there. It is possible for policymakers to go in detail and actually see what are the priority areas selected by various member states or regions. In fact, years ago when I attended that, I keep on calling it doctoral school that was organized by your university, I was so pleasantly surprised that one of the tasks that students were asked to carry out was to identify regions in the EU and find ways to identify regions that would have similar research innovation priorities in photonics, for example. And some of the innovative solutions and ideas that some of the students who attended that school, it was incredible. So I think this has, of course, it has been very popular. So the idea of actually comparing yourself to other regions has been an interesting development. A lot of regions in the EU now are using a tool that was developed by the European Commission again, that allows you not only to identify individual priorities in each region, but also to identify regions that are similar to your region in terms of certain socioeconomic parameters, criteria. So there's a tool available on the S3 web pages that allows you to go select your region and say, what are the regions that are like mine in the EU? And then you can go and see maybe some of the policies they have in place and see what has been successful for them in a way that helps policymakers to maybe get or become inspired by some of the developments in other regions that are similar to your region. and see maybe what are the some of the instruments or policy measures that didn't work as well.
Okay.
Because that's also an interesting development. Yeah.
Yeah, very good. And do you think maybe as smart specialization rolls out within a United Nations context or in other countries, that they'll still have that transparency, so that maybe an Irish enterprise or a European enterprise could look for opportunities to collaborate with regions internationally? Do you think that is that
Yes, certainly. So when it comes to the United Nations, back in 2013, 14, United Nations Economic Commission for Europe, or known as UNEC, has actually agreed to, or decided to, include smart specialization of what is one of the principles that they use in their innovation performance reviews they carry out in developing countries. And then, as I said, the latest development by UNDESA, so it's another UN agency based in New York, and that looks a lot into innovation-related activities, has decided to use the principles of smart specialization, including the stakeholder engagement process and evidence and so on, also as one of the methodologies for the development of a good strategy. All of these come with a need to make the process transparent. So for a lot of countries we work with, we ask them to have a dedicated web page where they share all of the developments in relation to these smart specialization strategies. So these web pages are not just for the citizens or actors in that country to know about these processes, because clearly it's important for you, for example, in Ireland, to know about the consultation process where the government is collecting views and suggestions on how to develop the next kind of a round of priorities. But it also allows other countries that are interested in cooperation or in certain, collaborative arrangements with Ireland to approach the policymakers who could be maybe the first contact point for them in order to develop maybe new projects together.
Absolutely, yeah. So sometimes, we as researchers or enterprises operating in a field, we get these opportunities, these funding instruments to which we can respond for support. And often they're confined to particular areas, such as the refreshed research priority areas. And you wonder, where did they come from? And so it's very interesting that there's this really strong and thorough methodology behind it. I think it gives us confidence. And it helps us to align our activities to areas of strength within a region, so we have a better chance of success overall. So that's really, really encouraging, I think. I want to ask you a question maybe about the global value chain initiatives. In Atlantic HepMed, we focus on value chains that are centered on the enterprise itself, and we try to build that out and look at the stakeholders. But just maybe value chains in regions and value chains globally, what's the tools or the methodology that they use to establish these, or can you comment on that?
Yes, so this work, we started carrying out some work when it comes to global value chains. So generally there is some methodology and data available at the national level. We had a case study developed, in fact, for the Irish biopharma sector with Professor Louis Brennan from Trinity College Dublin. And it was easy enough to do that at the national level because data is available. So trade data, for example, allows you to see trade flows between countries. So at the national level, it's a little harder at the regional level, but there are new tools that allow to do that as well. So we attempted to develop a kind of a methodological or conceptual paper on mapping regional capabilities represented by presence of certain firms. And in case of EU regions and countries, we decided to actually go for Bulgaria, because Bulgaria is one of the less developed EU member states. We thought it would be more challenging to do this kind of analysis for that country. And we developed another tool that allows, so it's based on the Orbis data. So Orbis is this database of firm level data, and allows to, it's managed by Bureau van Dijk in the Netherlands, and it's a kind of a paid subscription tool, but I think a lot of universities, in fact, have access to it. And it allows you to identify firms and the type of activities they have. So this is one of the tools actually that we consider as the most useful in the European context, that allows us kind of to understand if there are certain types of firms, so actors in each region. So we have geographic location of these. We can go to kind of a level of cities, for example, to understand where they are located, whether they have R&D activities, and whether they've been active in the past so many years, because there's also tax data. So the data that's connected to filing tax declarations every year. So that allows us to do kind of a global value chain mapping for these countries and regions within the EU. However, when we go at the higher level, in some cases, in order to do a global value chain analysis in some of the countries, for example, Albania, data that's available in Orbis could be somewhat limited. And in these cases, we have to develop certain dedicated surveys. So this could be a little costly to run. But also we've developed another tool that is basically kind of a qualitative research and is based on kind of interviewing key stakeholders in each particular area. So you do a breakdown of a value chain within that country or region, and then identify initial entry points. So these are individuals who know kind of like about a particular part of a value chain in that country, and you carry out interviews in order to understand. It's a bit like action research, in fact.
Okay.
Yeah, and that allows you to put kind of together a better understanding of various actors who in that particular country, for example, Albania, could be involved in activities at a specific part of a value chain. So yes, unfortunately, in some cases, we have to complement data that we have in a database such as Orbis with interviews, but that's, I think, part of the policy field we're working in.
Okay, I suppose it's very interesting always when I hear about value chain analysis that it's so varied and so dependent on the regions and the actors and the sectors in which it's been applied. So just to clarify for people, the Atlantic Med value chain analysis, which you'll hear about very shortly, is largely based on technical considerations. It's the technique, but the European value chain obviously is more complex and more holistic. So very interested then about the Vanguard initiative then, and how that led to themes and then to these working groups. Do you feel maybe that is the kind of is going to be the direction the smart specialization strategy is going to go for the next 5-10 years, do you think?
It certainly seems to be a sub area that's particularly that a lot of regions are very interested in. So we've noticed it's, the policy making process, when you develop a strategy for one region, maybe can leave policymakers feeling they're isolated from the rest of Europe. So having these activities, also some of the regions are very small within the European Union. So sometimes you feel your activities just wouldn't contribute or wouldn't result in anything that's significant enough. So when regions work together, they certainly can see better results, but also the critical mass is much easier to achieve as well. So in the new funding period, there's a lot of emphasis on this cross-border cooperation. And in fact, as I mentioned in the presentation, it's one of the criteria to be, so before funds are provided to any member state, they have to show exactly the measures they put in place in order to build these interregional connections. So yes, I think both in terms of funding that's being allocated to these tasks, but also maybe thinking of beyond DG Regio and the regional funds, we should probably think about other institutions, for example, European EIT, so European Institute of Innovation Technology, based in Budapest, that has significant funding. I think it's in a region, I don't want to lie, but maybe like 5-6 billion euros. Okay. And I think the amount of money they spend is significant. And while their primary focus is on kind of a knowledge triangle, maybe version of it with quadruple helix, where we have 4 different nodes, right, of like government, academia, businesses, and civil society, or user as the 4th node. Yeah, a lot of their funding. So in the new regulations that were published this year, EIT was also asked to introduce and to kind of put more emphasis on the interregional cooperation and smart specialization. So a lot of European instruments are coming now with an additional focus on smart specialization, which means that up until 2027, we'll have a lot of focus from the policy point of view, but also dedicated funding to support these developments, including the interregional cooperation.
Okay. And I suppose that is the key message, and it's a great message to wrap up this discussion on, is to say that, you know, the geography matters, I guess, number one, and that the funding instruments don't just center around Horizon Europe, but they really extend right throughout the interregional funds, the EIT funds, the COSME funds, the several other initiatives that are available to help people, you know, maintain and gain competitiveness in their operations. Ruslan, it's been a fascinating hour or so, or 50 minutes or so. I really appreciate the effort you put into preparing the presentation and for guiding me back in the day, but also just for bringing through the smart specialization in the last few years. Wish you well in your new position in the United Nations, and we look forward to keeping in touch with you. So
thank you, Jared. Thank you for having me. And as I always keep on repeating, your university in particular, I've been super impressed with the activities you've started or put in place years ago when it comes to when smart specialization was just introduced. I was very surprised to see some of the activities and very advanced activities that you had on KETS, so key enabling technologies, having dedicated forum. It was very impressive. So very happy to see this kind of work, especially at your university, and I'm looking forward to keeping in touch.
Okay, thank you. Thanks.
Take care.
Okay, bye.